Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Bolt Breakdowns on the YouTube channel. For Guilty as Charged, it's been a long time since I did one of these. I think back when we were doing like the draft and stuff. But I saw a couple comments, and there's been fiery debate over the last 24 hours about the cuts that the Chargers made, the cuts that they didn't make, that were on our YouTube video. And I saw plenty of comments in the live stream. I saw plenty of comments everywhere. And so I wanted to take this video to kind of respond to each point and say what I think, because a lot of people had the same comments, but just sort of centralized arguments. But anyway, I do want to say, starting out first, maybe we came off as haters in the roster cut video for our reaction towards Tyron Johnson specifically, and how the coaching staff has handled that to this point. But I do want to say, zooming out here a little bit, we are overwhelmingly positive on the roster, right? Like when you have Keenan Allen and Derwin James and Joey Bosa and Austin Eckler and so on and so forth, right? Like the Chargers are in a good position to compete, right? The roster cuts to me are about where you can win within the margins, right? Where you have one guy or a couple of guys that can really change how you feel about the depth on the roster, right? That's what roster cuts are about. But overall, like we do feel comfortable with where the roster is at. And I think that's important to say because a lot of the times we come off as poo-pooers or haters. But I don't believe that that's the case. We just disagree or agree with some of the select roster decisions. But without further ado, I do want to talk about some of these comments because some of the takes, they were spicy. And so let's get into it. This first comment came from NSN. He said, I thought the mission was we're going to throw this shit down the field or something like that, rather than dink our way down and rush 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Agree wholeheartedly with comments, though. On a hill, we need a separate dedicated returner. All right. So we're going to throw this ish down the field thing. I don't know why I'm censoring myself when I just said it 2 seconds ago, but okay. We're going to throw this down the field. That came from Brandon Staley on the All In Chargers show and sort of his approach to the offense. And that's responding to the Tyron cut, obviously. And I happen to agree with this. Not that I think it was the worst cut in the world by any means. Obviously, I think the Chargers will be fine. But if the mission is to stretch the field, then you should probably have a guy who has 4.3 speed and is top 10 in yards per route run last year. I don't think those are misleading stats. Like those are the stats that we all use to talk about Keenan Allen and Devontae Adams in terms of their quality of route running. So, not having him to stretch the field does strike me as a stark contrast to what Brandon Staley said a week ago. Granted, All In wasn't recorded a week ago. It was many months ago from when Brandon Staley was initially hired in that first coaches meeting. So, a lot of things can change between now and then. But I do think Tyron made it easier to stretch the field in a way that, say, KJ Hill doesn't, right? Josh Palmer, kind of unproven as a deep threat to this point, but I think he'll be fine. Jalen Guyton is really the only person right now that the Chargers have that you can confidently say stretches the field and kind of can create that separation on deep balls specifically, right? Mike Williams is going to go up for a 40-yard ball, but that's going to be contested and not really create an opportunity to score most of the time, whereas Jalen Guyton and Tyron Johnson's bombs from Herbert were plays that directly led to touchdowns a lot of the time. Obviously, you could talk about the number of touchdowns they had, but getting inside the red zone, I think, on those big plays is particularly important and leading to a scoring opportunity. So yeah, to me, it does contrast with what the take was from Brandon Staley, say, a few days ago. This comes from Ahan. Sad day, man. Hopefully Johnson doesn't end up on an AFC West team. Wish him the best, though. This came from Tyler's video that he posted a little bit ago on the channel, but we do have a source that has told us that Tyron Johnson is not going to return. Cortez Broughton is unlikely to return as well. So Tyron Johnson will hit waivers and he may sign with another team. Like that's the reality. Obviously, I hope it's not the Chiefs. I hope it's not Gus Bradley's Raiders. But I do think we need to prepare ourselves, obviously, for him not returning on the practice squad. Yeah, this is also from NSN. T. Billy will last about 3 microseconds on the wire, so he's gone. Um, I think Tyron could pass the waiver wire. I don't think the Chargers have much interest in bringing him back either way, though. I think that was a final cut, so to speak. But Tyron could also get outside interest outside of the waiver wire and may ask teams strictly to not re-sign him, so he can start to negotiate. Right, like teams are going to know that, hey, this guy had 400 yards last year. There's going to be some interest in him as a deep threat. Obviously, it's a little bit late in the game at this point, but there's going to be a lot of negotiation going on there. Let's move on to some non-Tyron comments. There were a few. I knew Amen was going to make it. I'm telling you, that burst for a linebacker is rare. That caught the coach's eyes for sure. I think that's true. When we talked about Amen, even though there were a few pass coverage situations in that first preseason game where he didn't necessarily nail it, you always saw that energy from him. And on run plays specifically, he just showed such an intensity. And so I am happy he made the roster. I did not predict him to make the roster, but I'm happy that they went in that direction. We talked about Tyron a lot, so there are a couple other Tyron comments we'll get to. So let's talk about some other stuff. KJ probably rostered because of special teams and work ethic. Hopefully Vizcaino lights it up, coming from the Nick Novak kicking camp. KJ was rostered because of special teams. That is 100% what happened. Obviously I think he will get in on some receiving plays, but it's pretty clear that the Chargers view him as the fifth receiver right now of that group who is, going to be doing punt returns. And right now, I don't think they see anyone sharing that duty with him. I know Jalen Guyton got some action, obviously, in the preseason, but I think they're just leaving that duty to KJ Hill right now, because right now, Tyron is a little too valuable to, or sorry, not Tyron, Jalen is a little bit too valuable to have, on punt returns, because he's really, again, without Tyron, the primary deep ball threat at this point. Hopefully this kind of lights it up, coming from the Nick Novak camp. The Nick Novak connection has always been funny to me, just from when Vizcaino was first signed, that Nick Novak was the first to break the news. So I have found that a little bit funny that, we're going to that Nick Novak well again. But obviously, look, all Chargers fans, even though it wasn't a decisive kicking competition win, I don't think a lot of us feel confident. We're obviously rooting for Vizcaino to do well and make sure that he has this job for many years to come. This comes from Brandon Chrisman. What worries me is that I thought this offense was going to be tailored to Justin Herbert's ability to make throws anywhere on the field. The players that we have on the roster tells me they want to move the ball slowly. I don't know. We will see week 1. So, again, this is in response to the Tyron cut. I don't think that they necessarily, or that this is necessarily a move that doesn't want Justin Herbert to throw the ball deep, right? They still have plenty of people that will catch deep passes, right? You have the guys in the tight end room who have caught 20-plus yard balls or extended plays with their legs, right? Donald Parham can kind of bowl people over like that. Steven Anderson has yak ability, right? And we've seen that obviously from Austin Eckler creating, big plays out of kind of nothing, right? Obviously Josh Palmer and Jalen Guyton, I think more so in the receiver room, can, create those big plays as well. As far as Tyron not being here, I do think that they still will use Justin Herbert's ability to make throws down the field. Now, I think not having Tyron makes that a little bit harder, just because there was that connection between Herbert and Johnson and between Herbert and Guyton. I don't think they plan on moving the ball slowly. I do think they still plan on throwing the shit out of it downfield. Whether they'll be able to do it as effectively, we'll see. Only time will tell. Jamal Dixon said, should have just let Stick go back to the practice squad. Nobody was going to claim him 9 out of 10 times. I think that's accurate. This is, sums up my feelings on the quarterback position on the roster. I've talked about it to death at this point. I think having 3 quarterbacks is kind of a waste, and 3 quarterbacks might have prevented them from having Tyron as the 6th receiver, from having a 6th defensive tackle, from, any number of, defensive positions that don't have depth right now. Emeka Egbule perhaps is a fifth pass rusher. So to me, whether the winner was Stick or Daniel, regardless of who you favored, I think that they should have kept two quarterbacks either way, and put one on the practice squad, obviously. Well, a looky here says, where did I hear someone say Dan Fouts saying Tyron Johnson was fighting for a roster spot was a terrible take commentary? So Steven did kind of crush Dan Fouts for that take, because apparently Dan Fouts did ask Tom Telesco whether Tyron was a possible roster cut, and I guess Tom Telesco said yes at the time. Yeah, I'm not going to say Steven was wrong on this one personally. Like, Tom Telesco's also been known to lie quite often, right? So he can say one player is a roster cut and then one player is not, right? Even when he said, hey, we're probably going to keep three quarterbacks, there were people who doubted that, right? And I think there was reason to, because usually Tom Telesco never shows you the cards that he's going to play. So to me, I don't personally think Steven was wrong for going after Dan Fouts. Dan Fouts also compared Easton Stick to Joe Montana. So if we're going to be real about what Dan Fouts' commentary level is, even Chargers fans have kind of poo-pooed that. So I'm just going to say that. Ken Krasenberg said, call Miami. They are loaded with returner talent. Obviously, Jakeem Grant was kind of linked in trade talks, not to the Chargers specifically, but Miami did kind of think about trading him, but then they kept him on a restructured deal. So I think there's not really a lot they can do there. They do have other returners, obviously, but I think the Chargers would probably have to pony up a bigger pick than they want to at this point for one of those. And then what do you do with KJ Hill? What do you do with, those guys on the roster if you are trading for a kick returner or punt returner? So that becomes the question. All right. James Brownson, the biggest strength of Herbert is deep passing. Cutting Johnson weakens that threat against the defense and allows them to play close to the line of scrimmage. I worry that offense will be dink and dunk. I worry that offense will be dink and dunk like New Orleans last year. Cutting Johnson was a sign that Staley is worried more about team discipline than winning games. Certainly a take. So this was what Tyler responded. They looked so ineffective versus the 49ers because they were trying to dink it, dunk it. Not that either QB can launch it. And talking about Stick or Daniel. Surprise, surprise, the offense looked better last week versus Seattle because they got him to work downfield. Unfortunately, their line just didn't do them any favors. I don't know if I agree with Tyler on that take. I think the offense did look better against the Niners than it did against the Seahawks. So that'll be my take there. To me, the whole dink and dunk conversation, right? They're going to let Justin Herbert rip it. Like, that's, to me, whether Tyron's here or not, I don't think it matters, right? The reason that New Orleans has been playing the way that they have been is because Drew Brees' arm was shot, right? Like, that's the reality. And Drew Brees didn't have the strongest arm to begin with. He even younger in his career, he was not a Josh Allen. He was not a Justin Herbert. He was not a Patrick Mahomes who could just, chuck the ball 60 yards without looking, right? Or without trying. So to me, comparing it to the Saints, yes, I do think when it comes to the players, right, we've heard that the Saints and their offense often played to some of those players' strengths. But I do think that you will still see Justin Herbert sling the ball, right? Regardless of, what the personnel is, just because Justin Herbert's arm at this point is a lot stronger than Drew Brees's. This comes from NSN, and this is sort of a comment we got. How much confidence do you guys have in Joe Lombardi? After all, he was just a man in the room rather than the real force behind Drew Brees' career in the Saints offense. He was a QB coach, after all, not an offensive coordinator nor head coach. The one time he was actually OC, he was fired 6 games into the season after a 1-6 start in Detroit. As a resume, it's actually pretty weak if he didn't share Vince Lombardi's name. This is the man we're entrusting with Herbert potential. I think there's a lot of criticisms you can make of Lombardi. Honestly, you bring up the Detroit thing. I'm personally not as concerned, though, because it seems like, as of now, that Brandon Staley and Joe Lombardi are more on the same page than Jim Caldwell and Joe Lombardi were towards the end of the Detroit era. And also, the offensive improvement after Lombardi left, I think, could be debated as to why that happened. I'm not currently concerned with Joe Lombardi now. That could obviously change in a month, in 2 months, when we have more of a sample size of offense. I also think the preseason isn't really a fair tool to evaluate him. But the thing about offensive coordinators also is if you're trying to get a really good OC or DC, as a new head coach in particular, you're going with unproven guys, right? Unless you're finding a veteran offensive coordinator who doesn't have a job, but that probably means they were fired at another spot, right? So I, have confidence in Joe Lombardi. It is not unshakable confidence. I think that there are absolutely things that could go wrong when we talk about this offense. But any offensive coordinator that I think Brandon Staley would have hired probably wouldn't have had that hot of a resume because if you're available for an offensive coordinator job, unless you're getting a promotion, say the Shanahan brother who is with Robert Saleh in New York now, right? Unless you're getting a promotion in that way, if you're a former OC, that means you failed somewhere else, right? And the NFL is complicated, right? There's a lot of reasons that coaches and offensive coordinators fail and then get another chance somewhere and do great. So to me, at this point, I'm not concerned about Joe Lombardi. I totally understand people that are. But I think we have a lot of time to go on that one to build a sample size of what the Lombardi offense is. All right. This is the Pipkins conversation. I'm surprised that they kept Pipkins. He better bolt up or bolt out. I've never heard the phrase bolt out before, so that one's kind of funny to me. A lot of people were surprised about the Trey Pipkins thing or angry about the Pipkins thing. That's really just a body thing at this point. You need 9 offensive linemen. You need your 5 starters. You need your 2 interior and your 2 exterior tackles, right? Being that Norton and Pipkins. Now, can they go on the waiver wire? Can they go somewhere else and try to improve over Pipkins? Absolutely. But from an initial roster standpoint, Trey Pipkins had to be on here. I know that people aren't going to like that. Dislike the video if you want. But Trey Pipkins is a body. Obviously his performance this preseason was not what people wanted, especially when he's been developing as a tackle for 2 going on 3 years now, as the project. But Trey Pipkins was not going to be cut. Right, the Chargers have to keep 9 offensive linemen and keep going forward. Now, can they replace him at some point? Absolutely. We saw Staley move on from some draft picks, right? He moved on from Joe Reed in 1 year as a 5th round pick, right? There were a lot of talks about Joshua Kelly and stuff like that this offseason. Now, the idea of moving on from Trey Pipkins eventually can happen given the proper drafts and stuff like that. And I think they've already set that into motion, to be fair, right? It seems like Storm Norton has kind of passed Trey Pipkins as the primary swing tackle, right? And if something happens to Storm Norton, then it seems like their second choice would be to kick Filer out to right and then put I'm forgetting his name. Brendan Hymas. You can put him in the interior. Skip my mind for a minute. But that's what you can do, right? So to me, the choice really wasn't, and a lot of people said, oh, you cut Tyron Johnson, but kept Trey Pipkins, right? And like Steven said on the podcast yesterday, that's not really how this works, right? You have to keep 9 offensive tackles and at least 5 or 6 wide receivers. Tyron Johnson wasn't kept because they didn't like him in the receiver room, for better or for worse. He was not kept, because they wanted to keep Trey Pipkins, because they wanted to keep some other player. So that's just kind of my feelings on the Pipkins thing. Obviously did not play well enough this preseason. I think you can make an argument that he should have been cut, but I think strictly from, the number of bodies that they needed on the offensive line at this standpoint, you kind of had to keep it. Now, that doesn't prevent them from going after Tyrell Crosby. That doesn't prevent them from eventually improving in the draft. But at this point, I think Pipkins was necessary to keep. The the reason Johnson is gone is because of the second string QB. I don't think that Johnson is gone because of Chase Daniel. That's a really confusing comment to me. So yeah, as in a sense, as you know, 4 Ts, one fullback, 4 running backs. That is really probably kind of what pushed Johnson out. In addition to some of the other stuff with the coaching staff, Johnson is not gone because of Chase Daniel and recent stick. I don't think that's the case. This is a comment that I've gotten a lot in the past couple hours, and something along this line. Apex Prowler says, I think he meant you're acting like Tyron is the second coming of Cliff Branch. He did some good, but he had 20 catches and 3 TDs. Get over it. So here's my thing. I don't think anyone that was disappointed in the Tyron Johnson cut yesterday really believes that Tyron Johnson is this top tier NFL receiver who's waiting to break out, right? He could, but to me, Tyron is probably, as currently constructed, when you have Josh Palmer, Mike Williams, and Keenan Allen, probably the 4th or 5th best receiver, on kind of that practice squad roster, right? And I think we saw his role diminish, right? So we do have to be honest about that throughout the preseason and throughout training camp, from where it started to where it ended, right? So the coaching staff did acknowledge that. However, to say that, like, okay, he only had 20 catches. Well, he had 400 yards, right? Like, that's a funny way for saying he led the league in yards per route run, has a 4.3 40 time, and had a great yards per reception number as well. As far as him having 3 TDs, I mean, sure, but like, he set up a lot of those plays by getting the Chargers in the red zone on a big catch, right? So that's important to note too, right? If you're just counting touchdowns. And as far as get over it, like, again, disagreeing about Tyron Johnson with the coaching staff is not the same thing as me saying Brandon Staley should be fired. No, I don't think that at all. I still have confidence in Brandon Staley as of now to lead this team forward. But to me, Tyron Johnson was one of those 4 or 5 best receivers on the team, and they kept 5 receivers, and he wasn't one of them. So to me, just from that standpoint, and we talked about the verticality of the team, I do think it was the wrong decision. I'm not going to lose sleep over it, like I said in the podcast yesterday. But, to me, just boiling down Tyron to 20 catches, like, that's not really an accurate. That's like saying Jalen Guyton only had 30 catches last year. Yeah, but okay, he had 530 yards, right? So there's a lot of, things that you could say about this player only had X amount of catches, but you're not evaluating their true impact on the team and their ability to stretch the field. So, and I also saw this thing going around on Twitter that people were using that Tampa Bay clip of Tyron Johnson to say that he only runs streak routes. It's like, no, that's just blatantly false. Tyron had a pretty wide route tree that he used pretty often, right? I'm not going to say he was the best route runner on the team. Obviously, that's Keenan Allen. I think Josh Palmer is a solid route runner, but I would put him 3rd on that list if you're talking about route runners, and the stats bear that out, like I said, with yards per route run and some of the other analytics as well. So to me, it's okay to support the coaching staff despite this. Like, absolutely, that's where I am too. But people are kind of just lying to themselves about what Tyron Johnson was last year, I guess, in a way to make themselves feel better about the cut. And that's where I just strongly disagree. But I'll leave the Tyron talk at that. All right. Well, okay. This was also kind of the yanked off the field because of culture stuff. T. Billy had to be yanked off the field because his head coach said he was too heated. Guy's not a culture fit, and Guyton seems to have improved more than him. Plus, T. Billy has no special teams value at all. Not going to sit here and say Staley has made the wrong decision because he's literally a coaching genius to most players. And I'm sure there are legitimate reasons why he was cut. All right. So the yanked off the field stuff comes from he got into some scuffle with some 49ers DB during a scrimmage, and then Staley had to pull him off the field. But that's not what Staley said in terms of the reason he was cut. In Staley's post-game comments, or post-cut comments, he did say that it was a numbers thing. And that's ultimately the reason Tyron Johnson was cut, and did specifically say that was one of the tougher conversations have today in terms of the cuts, right? So, look, Could it have been a character behind the scenes thing that we don't know about? Absolutely, it could be. But players get into scraps all the time, like especially in training camp, especially in scrimmages. Keenan Allen got into a brawl with Nickel Roby Coleman and the Rams a couple of years ago, right? Like I don't believe that was the reason that Tyron Johnson was cut. I think they do think that it was a numbers game. I think they do think they had the luxury of cutting Tyron and putting that towards other roster spaces, at least for the time being. I disagree with their decision, but to me, Brandon Staley hasn't said it was a character issue, and I think to assume that because of one practice, I don't believe that it was a character issue. Just from what we know about Tyron Johnson in the past and what we know about Tyron Johnson now, I sort of strongly doubt that. Yeah, they took their best long ball threat off the roster. This is a comment I wanted to respond to. Okay. Nobody has been in the system. So this was referring to when I was talking about Braden Fajoko, and I said he had been on the Chargers practice squad and team for a year in relation to Forrest Merrill. So let's get that out of the way. It's the first year for everyone. Merrill was beating. Merrill was beating double teams and holding the line on every snap he was in there. Also, coach is building a specific culture. If the guys don't fit the culture, adios. Lastly, there will be some additions, subtractions, and re-signings in the next few days. No clue why they kept Hill. He must be great in practice. Like we said, they kept Hill because special teams and punt returning. They caught Austin Prohl. He had to have surgery. That's why Hill is on the team. Pretty obvious. As far as nobody has been in the system, so this is saying that, like, when we talk about Forrest Merrill, in particular, that Braden Fajoko and Cortez Broughton were more experienced players than him, and I think offer more as pass rushers than Merrill at this point. And Merrill, like Tyler said in his recent video, is a very deserving player to be on the roster. Like, I'm not saying that Merrill didn't deserve to be on the roster. I just do think that Broughton and Fajoko did deserve it more based on the sample sizes that we have on those guys, their experience, and particularly, I thought their preseasons were more impressive. Obviously, that last part is very subjective. But to say that nobody's been in the system, like, experience does matter, right? Like again, you can say that, hey, it's a new system, it's a new year for everyone because of the coaching staff, but like Keenan Allen has 9 years of NFL experience, regardless of which coaching staff he was a part of, right? From the Mike McCoy era to the Anthony Lynn era to the Brandon Staley era, et cetera, right? And again, I'm not saying that 2 years or 1 year of experience is the same as Keenan Allen's 9 years either, but going against NFL players and having a year of experience is a big deal, right? Like we talk about the Chase Young, Rashawn Slater matchup that's going to come up, right? The big difference between this, Chase Young, Rashawn Slater matchup that's coming up is that they're not equals anymore, right? Chase Young has been in the league for a year and been battle tested, right? Rashawn Slater is going to be coming into his first game. And I'm not saying anything is going to go wrong. I'm not saying Rashawn Slater is going to allow 3 sacks or something, but the experience difference to me does matter. I think we've seen it with rookie struggles that happen. And so to me, that would have been less likely to happen with Cortez Broughton and Braden Fajoko. And I also think that there's something to be said about the fact that taking a year to develop on the practice squad did help Braden Fajoko and has helped other players. So to say that, having a year or two NFL experience doesn't matter because Brandon Staley wasn't the coach then and he is now. Tom Telesco was the GM, and he got to see those guys perform. So and he's the one who's building this team as well. So to me, the comment that nobody's been with the Chargers or nobody's been within this larger system just doesn't make sense. And I get what you're saying, but that's like saying, oh, well, an MLB team changed managers, so nobody's in the farm system, right? No. People and prospects are in the farm system for long periods of time. I know it's not exactly a 1A apples to apples comparison, but it is the same thing. If you've been with the team, that doesn't mean you've been in the system, straight up. Even if you haven't been in Staley's system specifically. And then, condescending response, but also I'm condescending, so I respect it. Dylan did say, sorry, Alex, but just because he had the same jersey on last year doesn't mean it's the same system. Yeah, I know that. But again, it's about having that experience and going against some of those players, and specifically going against NFL talent in the case of Braden Fajoko that wasn't on the Chargers, right? Going against the Bills, going against the Patriots in those games. that stuff does matter, right? Like, I don't see how it's the same system other than the fact he played with a few of the same players last year. He played with like 20 or 30 of the same players last year who made the final roster. So it does matter. But I'm going to leave that at that. Someone else said the same thing. I responded to them. James Brownson said, sign Mitchell Schwartz and cut Pipkins. As far as I know, Mitchell Schwartz is still dealing with the back thing. So I don't think that's going to happen. Would be an interesting guy to take a swing on if they wanted to offer him maybe like a multi-year deal, maybe 2 years, and see what he is next year. But it doesn't seem like Mitchell Schwartz has any urge to play right now, just based on his injury situation. Wouldn't be surprised if he took a gap year and then came back. But it's not an Eric Fisher type situation where he blew out his knee and that's why he's taking a year off. But Mitchell Schwartz is still kind of dealing with his injuries as well. This comment just made me laugh. If we start worse than 3-3, I'm gonna find Stilly and Tom and rip their freaking fingernails off. So a lot of people weren't happy about the Tyron cut yesterday. All right. So, I mean, this was kind of a lot of the stuff that we were saying and talking about, pretty much. So there was a lot of cut Pipkins, but I've already addressed that. So anyway, I've been going on for 30 minutes, so that's enough. But yeah, subscribe, like, and comment below what you guys think about these arguments or what you guys thought. You know what? Comment below and tell me let's get positive. Who is your favorite guy that made the roster? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll talk with you guys like I always do, for better or for worse. And I will see you guys on the next pod.